Madam Chair, I just got off the phone with the mayor. He's in the process of joining now, should be able to join shortly. It's just after 4 o'clock. Several members of the public have joined. If you want to go ahead and get started with the work group meeting.
What's that? No, I dog sit him quite a bit though. So he's at my place, you know, maybe 1 week a month. So
I'm not sure who's speaking, but
he's a good boy. He's like a husky mutt. It's a rescue, so yeah, they like each other. Nice and cool out today, isn't it? Lovely.
Whoever is talking, we're about to start our meeting. Shall we do the cue to begin?
You are set to begin anytime you wish to begin, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay. Well, the meeting of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group will now begin. Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual meeting. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes Section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Andrea Rubenstein, and I am the chair of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Barry Clegg.
Here.
Commissioner Alvaro Giroux-Isaacson.
Present.
Commissioner Andy Kozak.
Here.
Commissioner Matt Perry. Commissioner Lyle Schwarzkopf.
Present.
Commissioner Matt Perry. Commissioner Andrea Rubenstein.
Present.
There are 5 members present.
Adrian, I think Matt Perry, I just saw a note from him that he's having trouble with the audio. So I think he's here in some way.
Got it. Thank you.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved, Giroux-Isaacson.
Is there a second? We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Hearing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Barry Clegg.
Aye.
Commissioner Alvaro Giroux-Isaacson.
Aye.
Commissioner Andy Kozak.
Here. Oh, aye.
Commissioner Matt Perry. Commissioner Lyle Schwarzkopf.
Aye.
Commissioner Matt Perry. Commissioner Andrea Rubenstein.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. The motion passes and the agenda is adopted. I will spend very little time on the first item on the agenda, which is the chair's report. And I just wanted to say 2 things. Number 1, we have to be done promptly by 6 o'clock at the latest because the city has another hearing coming up at 6:05. I also wanted to mention that I have gone ahead and prepared a summary of the comments we've received to date. Not all of them yet. I'm not caught up. It's a work in progress, and of course we'll be getting a lot more at our public hearings. But my plan is to make them available. I've just organized them by subject matter, and the idea was to make it easier to digest the comments if we're going to go back and review them. So that's just for your information. And I see that there's a link to the agenda in the chat now for those who need to see it. Second item on the agenda is a discussion with Mayor Jacob Fry and Minneapolis Police Department Chief Madaria Ardando. And again, I'm not sure if the mayor is here yet, but I know that Chief Ardando is here.
Mayor Fry is with us.
Oh, good. So welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for being here. Because we want to be careful of your time and our time constraints, we thought we would go right into the questions we have for you. Last week, the work group had composed a series of questions to the members of the City Council who attended our meeting. And so I've recalibrated them a little, and I'd like to start with those work group questions. And I frankly have other questions as well, but after the work group questions, I will open them up to the floor, so to speak. And these questions are for both or either of you. The first one is, has the City Council had any discussions with you or sought advice about how it will go about creating the proposed new department and the role of law enforcement in it? Has there been any meeting of the minds on any aspects of these proposals?
Madam Chair, this is Jacob Fry, Mayor of Minneapolis. First, I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak with you today and your careful consideration of this issue, which we all know is extremely important. You have a very significant role to play here, and so I very much appreciate your service. Madam Chair, to answer your question, the answer is no. We were not, neither the chief nor myself, and I'll let the chief speak for himself, but neither of us were involved in the crafting nor deliberation of the language for the proposed charter amendment. There's kind of two segments to the charter amendment. One which is entirely ambiguous, and that's whether we will have police or not. The other, it very clearly says may, not must, not shall. It is unclear if we will have police following if there is a yes affirmative vote. But the second piece is a matter that was actually brought up 2 years ago, and both the chief and I, and the Charter Commission for that matter, spoke against. And that was switching the reporting structure so that instead of the head of public safety reporting to one individual and the mayor, the head of public safety would have to report to 14 different people, 13 council members and the mayor. And that was an issue that was deliberated. It was not one that was we were consulted on either the first go round when they brought it and then didn't do anything in the last couple of years. And it also was not brought to us this time. So I want to make sure that I get to the remainder of your questions, but I wanted to answer honestly, and certainly the chief can speak to it as well.
Madam Chair, I want to say thank you again for the invite to participate in this important conversation this evening. To Mayor Fry's point, yes, Madam Chair, my answer would be the same. I have not been notified or had any sort of engagement with the elected officials as it relates to their proposal.
Thank you. In the view of either one of you, will the proposed shifting of power from the mayor to the city council change the police culture, and why or why not?
I don't think that a shift of reporting structure in and of itself changes culture in any way, shape, or form. The one piece that is changed, and dramatically so, I would say, is accountability. And this is a significant hit to accountability. You know, right now, when things go wrong, or right for that matter, there are very clearly two people that are responsible. Myself as mayor of Minneapolis and Chief Ardando. In the future, if 14 different people are responsible, being able to provide clear direction will be nearly impossible. When you have 14 different bosses, there's not clarity of command. And when something goes wrong, once again, who is accountable? Who is the one that you look to take responsibility? My concern is that it would be one big finger pointing contest.
Madam Chair, I would also just add to Mayor Fry's conversation, one of the important keys as being chief of police and having a singular point of executive leadership that I report to, being the mayor, is that I'm able to craft public safety and public safety policy and service and response based on the whole of the city, our 400,000+ residents, visitors, and businesses. If that were to shift, in my opinion, to having reporting to 14 different individuals, elected officials, I could see the potential for I could see the potential for either some wards wanting certainly either perhaps more attention, and others not perhaps getting the amount of service that they need. And so I absolutely see that there is a benefit to having a singular reporting structure in terms of the public safety, as I see it, as chief for all of our Minneapolitans here in the city.
Thank you. And the other side of the coin is how can cultural change that we've all been talking about, or reform, whatever words you want to use, come about if the current Minneapolis Police Department structure remains as it is?
I'll start by answering. There are a couple of significant barriers that mayors and chiefs alike have confronted where they've been thwarted from seeing some of the necessary change that they've wanted to put in place. And these structures, these elephants in the room, by the way, do not necessarily change in any way, shape, or form with the shifting that the council is proposing. And I'll be very clear with what I mean by that. The barriers have been a collective bargaining process that again has both the federation and a union contract, but most importantly, it's a state law. There is a state law that provides for mandatory arbitration. It's the final step in the disciplinary and termination process. And in that final step, as many, or in some cases even more than 45% of the cases where Chief Ardando or I make a disciplinary or termination decision get returned right back to the department from which they came. That's 45, almost 50% of the time. And so that arbitration provision, I do believe, needs to be changed. It is a state law alteration that would need to take place, and we've got some clear and specific language as to how that would look. And so, you know, the answer is, you know, simply shifting a reporting structure from one person to 14, does not lead to a culture shift. Leaving things the same does not necessarily lead to a culture shift. What would lead to the culture shift is if we're willing and able to take up these elephants in the room that have thwarted, again, mayors and chiefs in many administrations past.
Chief Ardando?
Yeah.
Chief, we're not hearing you. You're on mute. You're still on mute.
I'm going to deliberately pause just for a second.
There you go.
Am I being heard?
We hear you now.
Okay. My apologies, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So to the Mayor's point, reform and culture change will not change just by a shift in structure. As Chief, I will tell you that culture change it's probably the hardest part of the work in terms of leadership that I'm engaged in and have been engaged in over the past 3 years. It requires people. It requires looking at everything within the organization, from policy to training to hiring, to making sure that as folks leave through attrition, that we are getting the best, brightest, most empathetic public servants here to provide that service for our city. And that takes a lot of hard work. And by the way, that doesn't happen overnight. But you have to be focused. You have to be determined in that. It requires those relationships with our communities throughout. And so it's just a measure of changing the reporting structure does not absolutely address or deal with the culture change and reform.
Have there been proposals other than to hire more police officers, reform ideas we're talking about, that both you, Chief Ardando, and the mayor have proposed to and been turned down on internally in the city?
I'll start, Chief, and then you can perhaps add on. There are a number of proposals where we've experienced pushback. And I'll give you one specific one. Was we have been and are the first city in the nation to ban warrior-style training, both on and off duty. Now, if you recall, once we made that significant move and reduced that statement to policy, there was immediate pushback from the union, and specifically Lieutenant Kroll. As soon as we decided we were going to ban warrior style both on and off duty, Lieutenant Kroll actually invited one of the main individuals in charge of pushing out warrior style training, teaching warrior style training to the city in some form of seminar. So that is one example where we've seen pushback. But I'll add that there are a number of policy changes, policy reforms that are coming forward. As a matter of fact, we just released a very significant one today. And over the coming weeks and months, you will see a consistent drumbeat of policy proposals that will come forward. But are policy proposals enough to shift the culture? No, they are not. Culture eats policy for breakfast. And to shift the culture to a certain extent, yes, we are talking about people. We're talking about shifting the personnel. We're talking about getting the right officers in who have subscribed to the mentality and vision that Chief Ardando has laid out of compassion and integrity and service. And by the way, Chief didn't say this, but I'll toot his horn for him. He extensively interviews personally every single individual, every single new cadet that comes into the class to make sure that they have that right mentality. Now, on the other end, it's having the ability to get officers who have broken their promise out of the department. And as I've mentioned, there is a significant barrier to making that happen in all of the instances in which we would want right now.
And Madam Chair, I would just also add that the work of reform, it is constantly evolving. It is never something that you come in on a Monday and complete one task and then your work is done. It is constant. Part of that reform for me as chief means being in spaces with our elders in our community and what does public safety look like and feel for them. It is also me meeting with some of our younger activists in our communities who quite frankly are tired of the way that they feel that sometimes things feel as though it's the status quo. They are tired when they feel that there's an employee of the police department that has betrayed the community trust, yet they're still on the department, even after discipline. It's all of those things. I will also say that some of the things that I look at beyond policing, and I have been, and the mayor, back when he was a council member, downtown district, but also more as mayor, the importance of housing in our community. And I will tell you that a couple of years ago, I go out and speak to the young men in our prisons here in the state, And to a person, all of them have relayed to me that, Chief, if we do not have access to housing and affordable housing when we come back into Minneapolis, it will directly impact what you are trying to do. And so when I look at reform, as the mayor does, it is beyond just policing in that scope. It's all of these other social determinants that impact what people, how they feel about safety. And so, so it's constantly evolving. It's constantly forcing myself and the other men and women of the police department to be comfortable being uncomfortable, to being in spaces to hear different voices, and to lend that to how we shape and move our department forward in terms of reform.
Thank you. Have Attorney General Ellison's task force recommendations been helpful to you?
Madam Chair and Commissioners, so as Attorney General Ellison launched his officer-involved shooting task force last year, it has been helpful. One of the, to me, very important pieces to that over the course of the past year has been the testimonials of community members who have lost loved ones to police violence. To hear them, to hear their pain, and to hear what some of their recommendations have been, has been important. I will say that as far as a police department within the state of Minnesota, we have led in certain areas in terms of some of those recommendations. Many of the recommendations that were brought forth, I'm happy to say that our department has been doing those things or will continue to build upon those. And there's certainly more in terms of discussions of whether there should be a statewide agency other than just the county attorney's office that looks at investigating officer-involved shootings. Is there also a community trauma response after these occur? Are there resources to help those family members who've lost a loved one to a police shooting, to be with them and help them and give them resources and wellness resources along the way? So there's been some very good recommendations that have come from that, and I'll continue to include those ones that I think that would be helpful for our city as we move forward to the next phase of the Attorney General's work.
Madam Chair, you may also have been referring to the TRO action that Attorney General Ellison is also helping to facilitate, and the answer is yes, it's been very helpful, and we're ticking through many of the items right now. Definitely provides us with an additional lever to allow for that necessary transformation. We're appreciative of the Attorney General.
Thank you. I don't know how many other questions, but I'm going to open up the floor to other members of the work group.
I want to take that at 9. Yes, that's it.
Hello, are we there?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Jerome Isaacson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Mayor and Chief, for being with us. Chief, I just wanted to start out by saying that I know there's a lot of people who want to hear your opinions and thoughts about this proposal, and it's unfortunate the City Council did not reach out to you, but thank you for being here and for giving us your thoughts. I wanted to start with a question. I've recently read in the Tampa Bay Times an article dated July 9th, 2020, that the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, recently announced that some of its nonviolent calls to police will be responded by social workers. Calls about people who are intoxicated or have overdosed, people who are in mental health crisis or suicidal, homelessness, neighborhood disputes, and disorderly kids. The social workers will not be uniformed. The city is calling this initiative the Community Assistance Program, and they start with a $6.9 million budget, 3.1 from a federal grant, and a 3.8 city match. The St. Pete Police said they will save from hiring 25 law enforcement officers and about 5% of the total service calls, which are about 12,700 calls in a year. I was hoping that the mayor and the chief could give us their thoughts about this program, and if you believe that the current charter allows for this type of reform to happen now, or does the funding requirement in the charter require you to have the minimums of law enforcement officers? Thank you.
So, sorry.
Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Commissioner Juro Isaacson, thank you so much. I had an opportunity to read about the Community Assistance Liaison Program down there in Florida. It sounds like well, at least they're going to look at activating that. My understanding, October 1st of this year. There was a lot of input from community. I will say that we were actually pretty successful in modeling our co-responder program to some extent. This included a sworn officer along with a mental health professional. In my time as chief, I have communicated this obviously to the mayor. We agree on this, that there are absolutely calls that do not require our men and women in uniform to respond to, that does not require a sworn law enforcement officer to respond to. I think in 2018, we probably responded to approximately 15,000 what we label as EDP calls, or emotionally disturbed persons, or persons in crisis calls. I believe that number is probably far higher than that when you delve into the weeds of some of these calls. And I absolutely think that with the right trained civilian personnel to respond to these, I think that there absolutely is a benefit in doing that. One of the key models to our community responder models and programs was that it provided wraparound services with the main goal of keeping those who are suffering from mental illness in their homes or in their places where they're safe and feel comfortable. And so I read the article. I think I absolutely think that there's promise there. As far as the charter and funding for that, I'll punt to Mayor Fry as it relates to that, but it sounds like it'll be a good program that certainly had a lot of good buy-in. I will just say one thing about the article is it also did say that for domestic and assault type of calls, they are still that is still obviously a police response that they're going to continue in there. But they have a large volume of mental health crisis calls, and so they're going to launch that from the article October 1st.
Thank you, Chief. You hit the nail on the head. Madam Chair, Commissioner Drew Isaacson, thank you for the question. So first, under the present charter, yes, you absolutely can do these aspects of safety beyond policing, and I support them full-heartedly. Whether that's in the form of social workers or our citywide mental health co-responder program, these are programs that have seen success. There are programs that have been bolstered literally, I believe, every year in the budget in the last 2 to 3 years, and I anticipate can be bolstered even more. And so no, there is no charter change that would be required to have more of the calls answered by someone other than an armed officer, and I support that. I fully support that. The issue that we're now experiencing, that we have experienced and probably will continue to, is when many of these 911 calls are made, when we receive them, it is not immediately clear nor apparent as to whether the call would require some form of additional safety for the social worker or the co-responder. That's the issue. And so right now, as a matter of fact, as of last year, we had a 911 work group that was set up. We were meeting substantially before some of these dual crises that we've seen, and we have still work to undergo that would do the hard work of determining where we could have somebody other than a police officer respond. You know, this is not the kind of thing where you just say, let's do safety beyond policing, let's get rid of all the police officers, and let's have somebody else do it. There's hard work in actually determining how it will function, where the calls will go, how those calls are sorted, and then who specifically will respond to each one of them. And so I don't think we should we should do the hard work of this group that's already been formed and not just assume conclusions before we've really dug in. But again, you know, if we're talking about safety beyond policing, if we're talking about people beyond police respond to these 911 calls or otherwise, I'm very supportive, and I think we can go in that route without a charter change.
Madam Chair, to Commissioner Gerald Isaacson, I would also like to add something that we created over almost about 2 years ago was the role and position of our community navigators. And these are civilian members of our community who are really there to be a bridge to many of our communities, representing our Native communities, East African communities, LGBT, also working specifically with infant partner violence, and they have been, and also are those experiencing homeless, and they have been absolutely wonderful and valuable and working with community organizations, neighborhood groups, and others to provide, again, beyond just policing, to how do we build relationships, how do we bring information back to our elected officials in the areas of housing or policies as it relates to our trans and gender nonconforming communities, to our Native communities that are suffering in so many other dynamic areas. And so we both with the co-responder and our community navigators, we have been thinking broader than just policing and beyond policing in our city.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
I'd like to ask both of our guests. I see in this chart that there is a Community Engagement and Outreach Bureau that reports directly to the chief. What does that bureau do? And there's a bunch of things underneath that, and I can't read it very well. So what does it do?
I believe, Madam Chair, I believe that's Commissioner Kozak. Is that correct?
No, I'm Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Oh, Commissioner Schwarzkopf. Thank you for the question. So part of the work, and this goes back to Madam Chair's question regarding what does reform and culture change look like, and one of the things that I certainly know as chief, that it is beyond just counting numbers. It is beyond just being able to tell you how many burglaries we had in a year, how many thefts we are experiencing, but it's really about, are there opportunities that we can build trust, change culture, and a lot of that community outreach effort in our community engagement team, if you see there from the chart, for example, we have officers who've been dedicated to outreach with our Little Earth Young Women's program, to empower them. We don't want them that the only time that they experience a police response is some sort of adversarial 911 call, that they're helping them to build relationships there. A couple of years ago, wonderful, he was a sergeant at the time, now he's a lieutenant, came to me and talked about the fact that while we are experiencing homelessness in our city, oftentimes the police are the first face of government that many who are experiencing homelessness are going to see. And through his efforts, Lieutenant Grant Snyder, who I'm very proud to say, we were able to form, and through Mayor Fry supporting this effort, our first ever in the police department, our homeless and vulnerable populations team, that has been so instrumental every day over the last 2 years, played an important role at the Wall of the Forgotten a couple of years ago, are certainly providing assistance right now currently with the Powderhorn Park encampments. And so anyway, Commissioner Schwarzkopf, to your question, these are roles, working with young kids after school, computer, helping them with homework. These are things where we want to continue to build those relationships for the future generations within our city.
Thank you. We have Commissioner Perry who has a question, and then Commissioner Kozak.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know who this is, whether this is for the mayor or the chief or both, but when you talk about safety beyond policing, I envision that some of the things that police officers are doing now would be done by social workers or other personnel. And what I'm wondering is it possible to make some of the reforms that you were talking about or are in progress right now, or are the result of the 911 study, that would let you get down to that minimum value of police officers required by the charter? Or do you need to, as Chief, I think a couple of years ago, you called for a couple hundred more police officers. So I'm just trying to hone in on where are we at in that thinking, and if you could address that, especially given that what another factor of this charter amendment is to get rid of that minimum number. And it may be that you could do some of these things today that you're trying to do with just reducing the force without getting rid of the minimum number. So I'll step off now and let you guys answer that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Perry, thank you for that question. And so one of the things that when I had proposed a couple of years ago about additional resources, it was taking into account many different factors. Some of those including our population growth. And I always want to note that, and if there's any historians here on the call, when that charter amendment or that delineation between how many officers for the city of Minneapolis per residence, I don't know how long ago that was, but I do know our city has evolved and grown and continues to grow and change since then. You know, one of the things that I always remind people too about resources is it isn't just the response, it's a lot of the work that comes after that. It's a lot of the follow-up work, the investigation piece. You know, when I'm having conversations about what are some responsibilities that others could take on besides the police department, more than just response, but when it crosses an intersection, for example, of follow-up investigations, who presents for the victim's behalf, who investigates those cases, who collects evidence, and all of those. So it's complex to a certain degree, but I think we really have to. I think there's two tracks. I think that we need to still, and I know that there's a staffing study that has been proposed to do, which I think is still needed. It's critically needed to see, do we have enough of peace officers just to even do those core essential functions? And I think the work that's continuing to happen with, as the mayor indicated, the 911 study, and see where we can have other group, whether it's the model in Tampa, Florida that's been looked at or talked about today, whether it's expanding our co-responder, what does more community navigators look like. So I think there's two tiers and two tracks that we can be having a conversation at the same time. But nonetheless, we are still and have been engaged in looking at other areas where we are not necessarily the responding agency to do those things. And Commissioner Perry, I hope that helps answer some of that.
It does. Thank you. But I do want to do a follow-up. The question I really want to get at is, and you've answered some of it, Chief, is whether we are, whether you could make some of the changes and reforms that you want to while staying within what the charter is requiring for the number of funded peace officers.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Perry, and are we, just for clarity, we're talking about the 730 or that number, 700?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we have to. So one, for example, I always am mindful of just stating that when we look at that number, I think some in our communities see that number, whether it's 888 now or 730 as the charter number, that there are many who think that those 730 are all police officers, all individuals that are able to respond to a 911 call. That is not the case. That 730 or the 880, that includes me down to the most newly hired officer. That also doesn't account for our investigators, our detectives, our men and women who are out there. So when it comes to actually patrol, that number is probably more realistically right now, or able to respond to 911 calls, that's probably about 500 or so. And so I think we really need to do more further studying as it relates to the 911 study, the types of calls that we're continuing to see. If we were to totally just look at violent crime response, unfortunately right now we are experiencing a uptick in that right now in our city. And so there's a lot of different factors that play into that. If I were to just say to the commissioners on the line right now, I don't believe that 730 number would be adequate. With everything that is transpiring right now, I don't believe that would be adequate. But again, I think having more informed conversations, continuing to look at the data, continuing to look at the changes in our city, what role immediately could other services come into play to help our city? Whether that's teams, civilian teams responding just to mental health calls. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done and looked at. But if I were to tell you right now, Commissioner Perry, I don't feel comfortable or confident that we would be able to continue to provide the services just in terms of what the PD should be responding to with that number.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Perry, Madam Chair, just to answer the question a slightly different way. Yes, we would be able to make these reforms without having a charter amendment. I mean, yes, we can add mental health responders. We've done that. Yes, we can add additional social worker capacity. The key piece is determining where and how they fit in to make sure that they are responding to calls that are safe for them to respond to and where they are best equipped to address the situation. And so that's the hard work, again, that we need to do. And doing the hard work doesn't require a charter amendment. Doing the hard work means just sitting down, figuring the details and the logistics out. And, sadly, that has not happened yet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Kozak, and then Commissioner Mecci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Chief and Mayor, for coming today. Very helpful. My question is, the piece in the paper, I believe it was on Sunday, and it talked about the community outreach operation in the department, and I think the Police Athletic League, and that the department was going to have to cut back on these programs because didn't have enough coppers to answer the 911 calls. And I understand that, given the fact what the chief just talked about. I think the national average for sworn officers per 1,000 is 3.5, and we're at around 2. So I understand that. But it seems to me, without second guessing budgetary decisions, that when you have these community outreach programs and programs like PAL, I think you mentioned, Chief, the program over at Little Earth, that I think instead of sending these functions over to the health department or this new division over there, violence prevention, they belong in the department so that the coppers have more skills than just enforcing the law in the traditional way. Otherwise, you're going to have what you've just tried to outlaw, and that is the warrior culture. And so if you could let us know what you plan to do with those programs. I think they should be expanded, and I realize there's money involved. It's expensive, but it seems to me that's the direction the department should be heading. Otherwise, we're just going to have, the warriors.
Madam Chair, to Commissioner Kozak, thank you truly for that question. As I am engaged in discussions with the mayor as it relates to our budget, my sole responsibility is for the public safety for all of our residents and businesses and visitors here. And so at the end of the day, that has to be what drives me. If we are impacted budgetarily, I have to ensure that when any of our residents pick up the phone to call 911, that we have a squad readily available to do that. And so if that is being challenged, I have to make tough decisions in terms of the organization. And so those would more than likely be some of those units that would have to end to make sure that we can. But I agree with you to your point that as we're trying to change culture and trying to have men and women who wear this uniform, who are looked upon in our communities as trusted and legitimate. And one of the things that we cannot quantify, and I'm thinking of Officer Charles Adams, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with his name, but he has been a phenomenal. Matter of fact, I tease him, we call him Spank, but all the kids, young people call him OA, Officer Adams, but he's the coach at North High School. He's been there for many years. When that school was looking at one point in time, sadly closing because of enrollment and didn't look like they would be able to fill the football team, he went in there and his family, and they've turned it around. I cannot tell you for sure how many lives of some young people that he has saved from going down a path that may have been destructive, but I know he has. And those are the types of relationships, Officers Goodman and Sonby at Little Earth and the young ladies that they've been empowering for many years over there. I would hate to have to make those choices and decisions because it does feed into emboldening that bad culture that we don't want. But if we come to a point where all we are is just this necessary 911 response and the only time we interact with our community is on that level, that doesn't help change the culture that I'm so trying to do. So I agree with you, sir.
Thank you.
Just one more question, or one more comment. As Chairman Clegg says, our questions always end up being comments. But I do know, I don't know Officer Adams from North High, but I'm a different generation, so I've known his dad for about 30 years and have the highest regard for Charlie. But it seems to me that no one when they talk about reforms, they talk about the obstacles. And to me, the biggest obstacle, and listening to what you've said, Chief, and what the mayor said, is the city government, whether it's the mayor or the council. These things cost money. Real reform costs money, and I think that's the underrated factor in stopping some of the things we've been talking about here. And I don't want to put the mayor on the spot, but are you going to be able to tell the city council, if you want to change the culture, one of the things we need are more resources for the department. And without that, a lot of these things, I know you have the co-responder program, and someone told me it was a 9 to 5 weekday program rather than a 24/7. And these incidents don't occur on a regular basis. They can come anytime. And so, am I off base there? Is money to me is as usual? Policy comes down to money, and I would hope that I think most people in Minneapolis would be agreeable to seeing their tax dollars go for these kind of programs.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kozak, I hear you, and obviously money is a significant factor, and I'll state that while I agree with the chief in that public safety obviously has to be the first priority, the first consideration, and I'm a big supporter of programs like PAL, and so we're going to be working to help find necessary funds to keep some of these programs going to the extent we can, as I think they have delivered results in the past. Now, just the presence of delivering results does not mean that we don't need change, because absolutely, I think it's clear we need deep structural change in the way the department and policing functions. And as we are heading into and doing markup on a budget that requires and has deep fiscal impacts. I mean, we're looking at between $165 million and $200 million worth of deficit, and obviously these issues and crises have been compounded by one on top of another, causing even further costs to add up. And if you add on top of that the significant item of police overtime, I mean, over the last several weeks, over the last month and a half or so, yes, we have had officers, police officers, firefighters, 911 dispatchers, all undergoing really significant hours that could add up even more, and it would add to a further cost. And so all of these issues are intrinsically linked, and yes, there is obviously a budgetary impact.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor. Very good.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Commissioner Metke.
Hello, Chief. This is Commissioner Metke. As you know, back some years ago, I chaired an initiative in South Minneapolis in the Phillips neighborhood under the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the 4 principles of that initiative were prevention, intervention, community policing, and law enforcement. Then we wrapped in a reentry initiative on top of that. And so when I look at change in the police department, I go back to that period of time, and I think in my head it's not either or. And then to add to that, I live, as you know, off of Lake Street, and serious upticks of crime. And what I've always heard is that there needs to be 95 officers per precinct to just be able to answer 911 calls. So then in looking at this flow chart that we just got, that doesn't leave a whole bunch of officers to fill those other spots. And as you have said earlier, the work really starts after the patrol and after the arrest. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of what your vision would be overall with what the staffing should look like, how we partner with prevention and intervention, and just kind of share that vision, because to me, when I look at the math, it's a little scary.
Yes, so Madam Chair, Commissioner Metke, it's good to hear from you, and the work that you did back East Phillips back then in South Minneapolis, it was monumental and groundbreaking work. And so one of the things, as you related to in the map, I think that we have to have, and I think that this is a part of that discussion, is we have to have some honest discussion about how do we accomplish both? How do we are able to have a department that has the resources it needs to deal with, unfortunately, those things that does require a police response. And as we've said, right now, year to date, we've had over 250 people shot and wounded in our city, which is unacceptable. And I report this to the mayor, and we have discussions about our strategies and tactics and how do we try to prevent this. Our homicides are up this year. There's a lot of things that we have to respond to, but there's also things in areas that we can do to prevent that. And you talked about intervention. There's a reason why I go out and speak to the young men in our prison systems. They're coming back to our cities and our zip codes here. We need more community folks. We need more community advocates out there. We need intimate partner violence. And when children witness that in the homes, I will tell you that the research has shown that if we do not do something to intervene when young children are witnessing domestic abuse in their homes, that traumatizes them, and they act out as they go on and get older, and we ultimately end up having some sort of interaction with them as police. Those experiencing homeless. So I think that right now the map that you're seeing, you're absolutely right. I have to, as chief, I have to make sure that we have the resources capable for just those essential police responses. I also, one of the things that gets left out in many of these conversations is victims, and making sure that our victims, the follow-up, that they have an investigator who's not just placing their case on a pile and that they're feeling left behind, that they're getting the attention that they deserve and need. And so that's very important. That is why myself, the mayor, we are looking at our org structure each and every day. As the mayor mentioned, there are budgetary things that we have to consider that he's looking at every day. I have to have contingency plans in place. We talked about Pell. We talked about the co-responder, community navigators. These are all things that are essential. There are things that by mandate I must do. When someone picks up the phone in Minneapolis to call 911, there's a mandate by the mayor too. I have to have a squad car respond. But there are other things that we are doing that are just as important that aren't required by mandate, but are the work that Officer Adams is doing at North High, the work that our Officers Sambi and Goodman were doing at Little Earth with the girls over there, Lieutenant Snyder with those experiencing homelessness. And all of those are a part of public safety, are part of our public health. And as I believe it was Commissioner Kozak said, and I'll punt to the mayor, but those also, they cost too. But I believe we can have both of those conversations. I believe that Madam Chair convening this tonight is important. It's the first step, and we need to continue this here. And I'll also say too, reform is needed. We need to have actionable reform. I've been telling my team members that the one thing we do not have is the luxury of time. I need to make sure that we are creating a new MPD, and that will occur. And we will be on the right side of history. I'd be remiss to say that there are people that are hurting. May 25th has changed our city and our country, and I do believe that the will is there now for police agencies across this country to have bold conversations, to have bold talks about reform, how race and policing are inextricably linked. Myself and the mayor having those conversations each and every day. And so those conversations and that reform must take place as well. And so it's all of those things, Commissioner Metke, and collaborating with our community. I'm not going to know everything. I need to listen to our community stakeholders and see how we can do things better. East Phillips is a little bit different, perhaps, than the Jordan neighborhood in certain areas, than the central neighborhood in Northeast Minneapolis. And so it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, but all of this in terms of public safety is going to be so helpful in reform as we continue to move forward.
And Chief, just as a closing comment, I would think too that some of the community engagement work that you do leads to diversifying the police department. Isn't that true? Because if you don't build relationships with the young people, they're not going to want to grow up to be officers. And I'm wondering if you could just say a couple words about that.
Yes. So, Madam Chair, to Commissioner Metke, you're absolutely right. One of the commitments that I've had for the mayor when I came into the role as chief is to diversify our police force. It has been it's predominantly a white male organization and industry right now, but we've had a wonderful opportunity. I will say our community service officer program we've shown such great diversity and inclusivity within our city residents, young people who want to serve their communities as peace officers. That has been a wonderful gateway to getting diversity within the Minneapolis Police Department. And we pay them through their time here as community service officers, and then we hire them, and they're part of our community. We've got a wonderful diverse recruit class that's already in place now. And those are, again, that's what hiring helps us to do as well, when we can recruit specifically from our communities. And so that is something that I would like to see continue. But for us to be able to get some young former Minneapolis Central High kids and get them on the department, the men and women. I will tell you right now too, women and women of color is absolutely what we're missing in this organization, and we're doing our best for recruitment and going out to communities and trying to recruit as best as we can. And so, but those are things that as we change culture, it's about people. And we need to do our best to make sure that we're getting the right people and those people that truly are part of Minneapolis and reflect our values as a city.
Thank you, Chief. As I know that's probably the last question, so I just wanted to chime in on a couple of items. First, the Chief's absolutely right. We do need a new MPD, and the Chief and I are entirely committed to seeing that vision come through to fruition. And that, yes, comes in the form of these new recruiting classes that comes in. It comes into diversification. And by the way, the last several classes that have come in are among the most diverse in the department's history. I don't have the precise numbers in front of me, but It's very apparent. And we are committed to this culture shift. You know, this is not just lip service. This is work that we are doing and undergoing day in and day out. We're not backing away from it in any way, shape, or form. The task, of course, that you have before you is evaluating the charter amendment that would come forward at some point. And to be clear, and I believe I've already stated this, but for the reasons I've already described, I will be voting no should the question appear on the ballot in November. And as to procedure, I don't want to infringe on your process. You are the experts, and I want you to be able to make your decision with all of the information that you have available to you. And so I appreciate your willingness to hear from us today, and thank you for the questions.
Thank you both, Mayor Fry and Chief Ardando. Before I close out this discussion, I just wanted to ask you, I think you've already done this, but if there's anything else you wanted to add, now is the time.
No, I'll save you some time.
Okay, thank you. And I want to add one thing, which is we're listening very carefully and hearing what you're saying. And to me, there are two bottom lines. One is that which you have expressed so beautifully, which is public safety. But the other is the pain of George Floyd's death. And I think we all agree that we never want to see that happen again. And if there's, whatever it takes, whatever wisdom we don't have or have to make that never happen again will be something I think we're all aiming for. So thank you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I could not
Chair,
agree
thank
more.
you. Commissioners, thank you so very much.
So are there any other questions or comments before we move on to the next item of the agenda? Hearing none. The next item is a discussion of the possibility for a community survey from a third-party provider, Voices Up. And they have offered to join us today and give a brief overview of their services, with the idea being a possible community survey with respect to the proposed charter amendment. And so I turn it over to you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Chief Ardando, and Mayor Fry. My name is Rob Ryle. I run a research consultancy, Isometric Solutions. Joining us today, two colleagues of mine, Ed Saraki and Espen Nygaard. I'll make one apology for my busy background. If you can see the white blotch back there, that's a plot map of the city of Minneapolis, 1903. And on Kenwood Parkway, where I live, there is only one house at the time, and that's the house I bought in 1997, and I've lived here since 1984. What we're going to talk about today is something that was the result of an outreach that began on the 26th of May, when I reached out to now a total of 30 colleagues, 16 of which live in Minneapolis, and talked about what has happened. And rather than critique or just spectate, we put our heads together to figure out what might we bring to the city to help solve and heal. And what we're going to show you today is thousands of hours of work in just 50 days that resulted in a platform for infrastructure, for feedback that we offer the city to use. Our initial intent was not to bring this to the Charter Commission, but as we saw the wording of the amendment and we saw the power and the agility of our platform, we've decided to spin our initial thought and show you today how this might work for you. So with that being said, let me ask you to advance to the, or maybe Ed, if you could take the slides, we can go that way. The one thing I would tell you, so this image of the Stone Arch Bridge, while we move forward, it's not accidental. We're all about bridges. And I began my career here at Pillsbury, working right next to the A Mill, which of course is all about harnessing the Mississippi River, the origin of our city. And this platform that we bring to you today does essentially the same kind of thing. It harnesses the citizens, it harnesses the stakeholders, right, the business owners, and brings to you, our elected officials, voices that aren't always heard, but it does so in a way that they're statistically analyzed, so you're seeing what is most important, the most important signals, while also allowing everybody to be heard. So let's go to our next slide, if we could. Thank you. So, real simply, what we have is we have a whole lot of communities that we want to harness. We have several different types of technologies that we're going to be able to leverage. And we have some strong methodologies around the technology of participation that we can use to shape and share and learn. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to EJ, who's going to talk the rest of the slide.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And again, thank you, commissioners and Madam Chairwoman and Mayor Fry. I know that this time is really valuable for everybody. And, you know, when we got together first with Rob and started talking through this and saw the opportunity that we had or felt we had to bring together something that we have a lot of passion for with the current climate, we thought it was really imperative to try to put something out there for people to be able to leverage, to take advantage of. We are folks who have a ton of experience in bringing together different groups of people through feedback. And that's, you know, I've got 16 or 17 years of sort of feedback from people, as do some of our colleagues. And I think across this whole team, it adds up to, you know, almost hundreds of years of experience in both bringing together and understanding what people have to say and what people are thinking. And sort of extending that, we thought about how we as sort of technologists and we as people who care about the communities can help elevate voices and help make it easier for people to come together and to provide a connection between themselves, their communities, and the people who represent them. So we've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort building a platform, and that's, you'll see on slide 3 here. You know, it really has two sides of it. And on the technology side, it is really focused on this idea of elevating voices, of meeting people where they are. So recognizing that community meetings like this are great. They are a good way for people to see what's happening and interact with those who are representing them and making decisions on their behalf. But they're not always easy to get to. Public, you know, comment periods on proposed ballot amendments like this are good, but also not always the most accessible for people. So we wanted to find ways to reach people where they are and do so across channels that they're used to, channels that they are already interacting with, things like Facebook and Twitter and their other social media channels, and then help them connect with one another. Because we know that community engagement, and I've learned this through, you know, my own volunteerism, working with inside of my own community, volunteering on campaigns, and working with elected officials. We know that when people in your community are working together and you see that they're working, that you're more likely to put in the work as well. You're more likely to put forward your opinion. You're more likely to try to reach out to those folks that are your representatives. And I think the other side of that, from working with elected officials and people who have been appointed to positions, is that the data that gets to people isn't always great. And I've spent a lot of my career helping people make decisions based on data. And I recognize that, again, some of those media that we use as communities and as governmental organizations to collect feedback is often very unstructured. And it's hard to parse through. And I think I heard the chairwoman say earlier she was going to sort of categorize some comments to see if you could filter through them. But that's difficult to do, and it's hard to know and to trust the information that you're getting. And so the other thing that we wanted to do was to provide a way to structure those conversations in a way that we know that what's coming out of there is both what the people have to say and also actionable and insightful for the people who need to make the decisions, and in turn can be shared back out in a pretty transparent way. So, that whole platform is built on those kind of concepts of transparency, those concepts of meeting people where they are and providing direct information. So, Rob, I think this is really where we come together in terms of you providing some of those real details and some thinking about how to make decisions based on that, right?
Indeed. And this slide, let's just sort of finish off this slide. So the other half of this slide talks about, well, how are we going to be doing this? So we're going to ask the right questions in the right way. We have several experts who know how to be asking the right questions. And when we think about you as the work group and you as commissioners, what kind of questions would you like answers from the citizens on? That's where we placed ourselves. As you make the decision to evaluate the amendment before you from the City Council, you can do that with many different vehicles. And our thinking is maybe we can bring you an ocean of information analyzed so you can make a very informed decision about constituents across the city. That's our main goal. Of course, then we would analyze that information for you, and then we would work with you. We have experts at working with you so that you can assimilate what we learn. And we can show you the data, and we can show you and we can think through with you the implications. These are structured communication workshops. We've been doing these with great success. And this can, again, we can get feedback from all stakeholders when we do this. Right. And then we assist you with the act phase. And that act for you, we understand to be drafting recommendations relative to the amendment that's before you. Regardless of how council members ultimately end up voting, what we offer you is a way to be super informed about what the citizens are thinking, the stakeholders are thinking right now. So that's the main offering here. So let's take it to the next slide. Perfect. Go ahead.
Well, I think what is really important for us to sort of emphasize is a couple things. One, the immediacy of everything. And I know, we talk about a number of phases on the last slide, but it really is quite quick to get that information to you, and that's really important. And I think when we think about why we have decided to put this effort in and put the work in, and ask for your time today, it's about these three areas. So, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to make this part of the decision-making process for this and for other initiatives, frankly? The first is for people, right? We want that connection. We think it's vital for democracy and for the health of a community and a city to have those connections between all of the residents and the elected officials and their communities. We want to be able to bring those voices up. We want people to be heard. We want them to know that they're being heard. And that really helps build some accountability there and build some transparency. The second is for you all, right? For you as appointed commissioners, as elected officials, as people who are charged with the care and well-being of the entire community in many respects, the entire city. How are you making those decisions? Are you getting the information to you in a way that's timely? Do you feel good about those decisions? And I know from, speaking with elected officials all the time where they say, I don't know that what I've heard is enough. I don't know that I've heard from all of the voices. And the chief was speaking earlier about going out and speaking to folks in prison, going out to speaking to people in the community, and that's vital. And if we can build some more of those bridges, I think that it's really important. Rob?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about what we're offering here, so let's take it to the demo. Let's get right there because I'm learning people are ready to understand what this really is. If we can get to the slide with a demo, let me ask all of you to take your mobile phones, your smartphones, all right, and I'd like you to put it on camera mode as if you were going to take a picture. So I want to take you right to how this might work in the interest of time. So first thing you see here on screen is a compelling call to action. We spent some time, and colleagues of ours invested greatly in thinking about how might we put some communication in front of our stakeholders to invoke their reaction, to give us some feedback. So if you take your camera on the camera mode and just hold it over the QR code, your camera should resolve for you and offer you to take a survey. So that's important because that's one of the many ways we can reach all of the citizens in the market here, right? We have, I don't know, 91% of people have smartphones of the 400.
Gentlemen, excuse me. I'm afraid that we're running out of time.
Okay.
And perhaps what we can do is we'll have further discussion with you after this meeting.
Okay.
If that is okay with the rest of the work group and Chair Clegg, I can continue the discussion with you and report back.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I would recommend that we have a subcommittee of the work group to continue this discussion in the next couple of days.
Okay.
Excellent.
And we're sorry we had to cut you off, but we really appreciate you being here.
Your meeting. That's fine.
Yeah, we really appreciate the time. We just care too much. We talk too long. So thank you so much for your time and the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a discussion of the Public Employees Labor Relations Act. And I'm going to try to make this brief, just to say that among the issues we need to consider are the legal implications of the amendment language, and particularly leaving it to the discretion of the City Council to retain a law enforcement division. The City Attorney's Office is working on these questions now, and we'll have more information and advice for them soon. But meanwhile, Commissioner Ginder very graciously offered to tell us about an October 2019 decision of the Minnesota Supreme Court interpreting the Public Employees Labor Relations Act. And so I'd like to turn that over to Commissioner Ginder.
Thank you, Chair Rubenstein. In October of 2019, the Minnesota Supreme Court decided a case called Firefighters Union versus the City of Brainerd, which has some implications on the proposed charter amendment from the City Council. Briefly, in that case, the City of Brainerd has a small fire department, unionized fire department, that had 5 employees in it. Because of budgetary constraints, after they negotiated a contract, the city decided that they wanted to go to a part-time, basically almost unpaid volunteer force. The union sued, basically alleging that it was an unfair labor practice. Now, what you have to understand under PELRA, there are inherent managerial rights such that any city or governmental agency enjoys in Minnesota. Such things as setting the size of a budget, deciding how many employees generally they're going to hire. Macro issues like that are deemed to be inherent managerial rights. And all that they have to do with the union is just meet and talk about that. They don't have to negotiate it or come to an agreement with it. Conversely, things that affect what are called terms and conditions of employment in Minnesota have to be negotiated between the employer and the members of the union. In terms and conditions of employment is a broad phase. It covers everything from pay to all kinds of working conditions. In this case, from the city's viewpoint, it seemed clear that they were exercising inherent managerial authority when they decided that they were going to get rid of the fire department, which had the effect of getting rid of the union. The Supreme Court said that's true. It was inherent managerial authority to do that, but they relied on the other sections of Pell Law, which talk about the duty to negotiate and bad faith. And what they held was that it was an unfair labor practice when they got rid of the Department of the Firefighters because it had the effect of getting rid of the union. And they said in order to read those two together and to give effect to both sides, they found that the actions of the city in getting rid of the fire department and thereby the union was an unfair labor practice. Now, the impact that has on the city's proposed amendment is to the extent that the city gets rid of the police department and there is no police department, there is an arguable, and the union disappears, then there's an arguable bad faith or an unfair labor practice. As a practical matter, I think it's clear there has to be a police department. If this gets on the ballot, not necessarily, there has to be some kind of police force. If this gets on the ballot and is passed, there will no longer be a charter police department. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be or won't be a non-charter police force of some kind. Because as a practical matter, you have to have licensed peace officers in order to do a number of things that the city would need to still continue to do. You know, if you're going to execute a search warrant, only licensed peace officers can do that. If you're going to stop traffic and issue citations, only licensed peace officers can do that. So there's the tension there that the idea that if you get rid of, you ultimately get rid of a police department and ultimately get rid of a police union, I think runs significant risk of being determined to be an unfair labor practice with resulting in the fact that you won't be able to get rid of either the department or the union. This case, and as well as Peller, also raised a number of other issues because let's assume that there is a police department of some form after a successful charter amendment, and the council then moves forward with creating its new law enforcement agency. It raises the issue of, okay, what union does the new law enforcement agency belong to? Because if there still exists a remnant of this old police force in the union, the argument is going to be from the union that the proper bargaining unit for the new law enforcement section is that existing union. It's an interesting case. It throws a lot of complexity into what the proposed charter amendment is trying to do, and it raises a number of other issues too, some of which are footnoted in the opinion, but I think it's something that needs a significant look at by the elected officials as well as this body as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Ginder. Are there any questions? I wanted, Commissioner Abbott?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to, I look at this case came up last week, and I want to thank Peter for highlighting it. As it turns out, I know the lawyer that represented the city of Brainerd. I was handled a case against her previously, and I ended up having an interesting conversation with her this afternoon about kind of the implications of this case for the city of Minneapolis. And I think one of the ambiguities about this case is they really haven't decided on a remedy yet. Just as a factual matter, the city of Brainerd went ahead and did their part-time on-call system, and they've been litigating this ever since 2016. And the procedural posture of the case was solely on the liability question. So the Supreme Court decided last fall that this was an unfair labor practice and kicked it back down to the lower courts. And they're having some difficulties trying to figure out what what does that mean? What does the remedy mean? Does the remedy, do you have to hire back all 5 firefighters? Do you have to rescind your part-time on-call department? And all of those discussions haven't been litigated yet, and that's part of, apparently it's not even, they're not even going to get to that apparently until October. So some of the more drastic implications of this decision, aren't even necessarily yet apparent. I think for our purposes, there are a couple of things that are relevant. One of which is it was a fairly significant issue in the case that the firefighters had just signed a 3-year contract when the city of Brainerd decided to abolish their 5-member fire department. So there were, the firefighters then were terminated theoretically with, 2.5 years left on their contract. I mean, and part of the remedy issue they get to in October is going to be a monetary damage clause for the 2 missing years of that contract. Whereas in the case here in Minneapolis, the police federation contract expired at the end of 2019, and we are, currently operating in as if the contract still applies. But there's no, unlike the city of Brainerd, we have not signed a document promising the current police officers that they've got another 3 years of employment. That's a bit of a fact in our favor, I think, if the city chooses to proceed with a restructuring that would eliminate this department and create another department, which includes its function. But I think the implication of the decision, I think, which is also very concerning, is there is simply no way, I think, under this decision to avoid having to negotiate with the existing police federation. The Supreme Court has specifically ruled in this case that the city could not disestablish the bargaining unit by creating a different city department and standing up kind of new negotiations with the new department. It appears to me, as I read the case, that we have some obligation to negotiate with the existing police federation about these changes. And even if a managerial function means we don't have to actually accept their proposals, whatever contract is going to get signed with the new department or the new division of law enforcement is that bargaining unit will be the existing union. And and given the fact that I think pretty much everybody's identified the biggest obstacle to change in this environment is in fact the existing union and their attitudes towards how to perform their job, I think that is I think that's kind of becomes the 800-pound elephant in the room here. So in some respect, I appreciate Peter's summary of the case. In some respect, I think he's being a little light about the implications of this, because I think the implications, at least in terms of negotiating over new work rules, I think are might be pretty dire. So I just wanted to add that information for the committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Abbott. Any other questions? Comments? Right, I think this is
I'm sorry, I have my hand up.
Oh, sure, sorry. Mike, go ahead. My computer doesn't show hands up for some reason. Go ahead, Chair Clegg.
Thank you. A question for Commissioner Ginder. So is it possible that the outcome of this case might be that the current Police Officers Federation is representing the employees of the new Division of Law Enforcement, and that if that's the case, does that mean we have to hire back the current Minneapolis police force in seniority order, and that they're represented by Bob Kroll or somebody like him at the Police Officers Federation? Thank you.
There's a number of complicated answers in that question. One is to the extent that the old force and union continues in effect for a while, and if at the same time the City Council wants to start hiring its new law enforcement officers, there will be a decision made. In the current union would obviously move over and say they have to belong to our union because we are similarly situated. We've always represented all law enforcement officers, and they would say that they are the appropriate bargaining unit for those new employees. And as a matter of course in Minnesota, if there's a fight over who the bargaining unit is, it moves to BMS, and the union usually goes first, and they propose that what the appropriate bargaining unit is, and BMS will then, if it's appropriate, select them as the unit. They don't necessarily select who is the best or the most appropriate unit, but if the union comes and says we're an appropriate unit, they get selected. It's only if BMS says that the proposed unit from the labor side isn't appropriate that it goes over to the city to say this is the appropriate unit. And that similarly happen if the department is completely gone, the union is completely gone, and they start hiring new law enforcement officers. A law enforcement unit of some kind will come in to represent that, whether it's the vestiges of the Police Officers Federation or one of the other statewide police unions. The second part of your question was hiring back. The current union contract has both layoff provisions as well as job bank provisions that are covered under the city of Minneapolis. And so this is a complicated subject, but generally, if these officers that currently belong to the union are laid off, they go onto a layoff list. I think it's for 2 years. And then they have first rights to come in to new positions that are basically law enforcement positions. That's simplified because there would be a lot of fight over whether they're going to be the exact positions or similar positions. But the police union in the contract, as well as civil service, has these layoff provisions that govern how laid off officers get back to work, as well as these job bank provisions where they're put into a job bank, they're paid while they work until they find positions for these people to go into. And to the practical matter, the positions that are most likely to comport with their existing qualifications are going to be the new law enforcement division that's created. So it's a long answer to say you could end up the same officers in the same union.
Right.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginder.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Jero Isaacson.
Go ahead.
I'm not an attorney, so that was a little hard to follow. But I understood that this could potentially be a problem if it passes, where we end up with the same police department and the same union. I'm not sure that that's a reason that I would want to explore that topic deeper and cause the timing to elapse to get this back to the council. I think there's a lot of things about this proposal, if it passes, that the voters will hold the city council members accountable to in the next election for city council. So if that were to happen, and we were get sued, and the city would be in a legal mess, that's something that the voters would remember and take account on the next election. And I just really quickly too on the consultants piece. I'm not really sure that the Charter Commission is the place for that type of service. I know there's going to be a subcommittee. Sounds like something the city council would want to do, or the mayor. But I'm not sure that that's something that we would want to do, especially if it causes the time to expire.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, this is Schwarzkopf. I have my hand up too.
Sorry. Go ahead.
The question I have, well, first of all, comment. As I listened to what the attorneys were saying, it sounds like there could be a lot of maybe 2 or 3 years of lawsuits after this amendment passed because of all these things that deal with the Employee Labor Relations Act. The question I had, though, is maybe Commissioner Ginder knows, of the non-police people who are in the police department, I think it's about 130, do they belong to the police union too, or do they belong to AFSCME or some other union? And so in the police department, do we have 1 or 2 or 3 different unions within that department? I don't know.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf, there are several unions in the police department. Under PELRA, only police officers, law enforcement officers can belong to that union. Part of the reason is because they are essential employees, and your clerk typists or other administrative people are not essential. The staff don't belong to the same union as the sworn officers.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Kozak?
Thank you. I have a question for Peter Ginder, Commissioner Ginder. Commissioner, we heard earlier on when the mayor and the chief were here, they talked about arbitration. And they said 45% of their decisions that they make, personnel decisions, are overturned by an arbitrator. That's almost 50-50, when you would think, it should probably be more like 90-10 in favor of management. But the question I have, there's not much, even in PELRA, how much of that arbitration procedure is controlled by state law, and how much discretion does the city have? Right? Is it all negotiated between the city and the union, or does state law control how much discretion the city has when it comes to arbitration?
Commissioner Kozak, basically it's controlled by state law. There are some things that, for example, the just cause requirement to terminate someone, and I don't remember exactly if that language is in PELRA, but that is such a given in labor law that I can't imagine any union ever bargaining that away. But the whole arbitration process is outlined in state law. And, those statistics about roughly 50% being upheld are probably accurate. Now, there are two tensions in there. One is the argument that you will hear from the union side, which is sometimes, and occasionally more than sometimes, correct, is that the department hasn't properly prepared its case. They haven't taken a good look at, in the past, of what have they done to similarly situated officers. Have they investigated the case properly, looked at everything that might be used as a defense or on that line. And then there are other times when you just kind of think, well, why is the arbitrator going this way? There seems to be no basis for it. And it's the way the personal feelings of that individual arbitrator fall down on. But it's primarily controlled by state law.
So if in fact the city wanted to changes, they'd have to go to the legislature, because and to me that's one of the central reforms that needs to be considered, and maybe we need to talk about it more here. Ultimately, that you can't run a department if half the personnel disciplinary decisions you make get overturned.
Yeah, I mean, most of these have been or are on the city's legislative agenda. Everything from, for example, should supervisors, they're technically not supervisors under PELRA, but like sergeants and lieutenants, should they be in the same bargaining unit as street officers? Because they end up, having an internal conflict in my mind, whether a sergeant is probably going to discipline somebody else when they're in the same bargaining unit. So they've had some of those issues on the legislative agenda. Historically, they haven't gotten traction. But the other thing is, when you're trying to do this, you have to be careful, because are you going to do a change that affects unions and trades throughout the state, or are you just going to try and fine-tooth something that just affects Minneapolis?
Yeah, I agree. The challenge is, the minute you start fooling around with PELRA, even if you try to have it narrow, targeted, very specific, you're going to get the teachers and you're going to get AFSCME involved. And that is a pretty powerful coalition. So it's not something that is going to be done easily, if it's going to be done at all.
With reference to the arbitration decisions too, I think we're hoisted by our own petard, because an arbitrator will overturn discipline if police officers have been doing the same thing for years. And even if it's wrong, if it's consistent, they're not suddenly going to target one police officer. Commissioner Perry had a question?
It's more of a comment. I just want to say that I think the discussion that we're having now is very pertinent to and helpful to me. The legal questions that are being raised and discussed by Commissioner Ginder are helpful. What I see as a commissioner when I'm looking at whether something should be on the ballot is whether it's fully baked or not, and that's a phrase that I got from Chair Clegg. And so understanding the implications, the legal implications, is in fact what I think is part of my duty as a commissioner. The survey work, I'd say I'm not quite certain whether that's in our bailiwick, especially since the City Council has their own plan that is supposed to come out in late July about engaging the residents. And I'm not even sure if it would be, I'm not saying no, but I think the legal questions have more relevance to me. Thank you.
Yes, I think Chair Clegg wants to say something, but I just want to say we're running out of time, and maybe that's what you were going to say. Yeah.
I was also going to say that I have put these very questions with respect to PELRA and this case to the City Attorney's Office, and they are looking at it and will report back to us.
I was going to suggest, in the interest of time, that since we still will be getting some more legal advice from the City Attorney's Office, we can continue this discussion in that context. There were two other items on the agenda. If people have no objections, I just want to go through them extremely quickly. One is I put on the agenda a discussion of other stakeholder conversations, and it's simply that it occurred to me that there are other people who have information that would be useful to us, but we don't have very much time to invite a lot of people to our meetings. We don't have a whole lot of meetings left. We're going to have the 9/11 people here next time. So I just thought that we could, as Commissioner Abbott has already done, and some of us as others as well, could be talking to people on our own and thinking of people for whom we might get relevant or interesting or helpful information that would help us make our decision. And then we could just report back at our open meeting, so that it won't be secret conversations. It's just that it will be a time-saving device. And unless people have an objection to that, I would suggest we'd be thinking about such people we might talk to after listening to what we've heard today and last week. A couple of thoughts I had were the head of the Civilian Police Conduct Oversight Commission, the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. There are lots of other people who could be very helpful to us. So that's what I wanted to say. Any comments, questions, objections?
Madam Chair, Schwarzkopf, I'm still a member of the International City Managers Association, having been the city coordinator. And they have done a lot of research in all the different towns or cities where they have done different kinds of police reform. I have no idea how much that is or what it is, but I could ask them for that information. I assume it's going to be a lot from a lot of different communities, and I don't know what you're interested in.
I think except for the time constraints, I think we're interested in anything we can get. And you may recall that when we were looking at the 2018 amendment, we did have a lot of information that Commissioner Ginder collected on other municipalities with city manager structures and what was possible then. So certainly it's worth asking the question, I would think.
Okay, I'll ask them.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, moving on to the last item on the agenda, which was going to be a discussion of the two alternate charter amendments, and I respectfully suggest that we save that for next time because they're well 5-minute discussions.
I agree, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree as well. I was going to suggest, I don't know if we want to, I mean, I hesitate to increase the number of subcommittees and bureaucratic process, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't create a subcommittee just to sort out the amendments and kind of keep it off the main work group agenda. I'm it's up to you guys. I mean, if I could see a situation where the next work group meeting also runs out of time as well. So, and I think a lot of this work needs to get done.
How do other people feel about that?
I agree.
Okay. Maybe we can do this by email, set something up after this meeting. Chair Clegg?
Whatever subcommittee we set up, the meetings will be open, of course, and noticed. So we'll have to give 3 days notice of each meeting, but we can work on that. And Commissioner Rubenstein, you and I can talk later about how they should be staffed and chaired.
Okay, thank you. It's also possible that at this point we have only one set of guests for our agenda next week, and that's the people who worked on the 911 study. And assuming that will take us maybe an hour, we could then leave the rest of the agenda to the alternative, possible alternative amendments. But
That's fine with me, Madam Chair. This is Jarrell Isaacson, and out of respect to the staff that needs to get to another meeting, I would entertain, or I would move that we adjourn our meeting so that they can get to that next one.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'm going to assume there's no objection, and we stand adjourned. Thank you all.
Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you.